The bike that I'm actually sitting on was previously borrowed by Chris Birch at the ABR Festival earlier this summer, where I was lucky enough to stand in the crowd watching him do a vertical wheelie sustained all the way up an incredibly steep, grassy off-road trail in front of a crowd of thousands of people. So I don't think we need to question whether the KTM 890 Adventure R has the performance when in the hands of someone with a lot of skill. But I think more pertinently, what is this bike like for the everyman rider? Someone who, like me, likes to try and do it all, but obviously has nothing like those levels of skills. Is the performance still relevant? Can it even be accessed? And where does this bike really kind of excel, and where's it not so strong? There's no doubt this is a punchy price point, so 18 grand is the rough spec we have here. So we have the tech pack and we have the upgraded 3 grand package of the suspension, which makes this bike on par with a Desert X Rally, which is very expensive for anything and makes it, I think, one of the most expensive middleweight adventure bikes that there is. So you would certainly expect a lot from it at that price. I was really surprised from my time with the bike. I mean, I have to say I have really enjoyed riding it, but what has sort of surprised me is that there were areas where it really excelled, and I don't think they were the areas that KTM really had in mind when they designed the bike and came up with the concept, and the areas that they probably did have in mind I was sort of less amazed by. So we'll kind of come back to those points, but it's probably worth it at this stage just going through the individual elements and kind of giving them some consideration, because there's some incredible features and there's some annoying ones too. So the engine is sort of, well, 890 as you probably guessed. It's a twin cylinder and it is 105 brake horsepower in delivery. So it's extremely powerful. That is enough, like that is more than enough. So in street mode, that is enough to make it feel like a ballistic missile in any gear. As soon as you get over like 1500 revs, you just absolutely warp speed down the road with poise and panache that just completely belies the fact that this is a 200 kilo adventure bike. It feels more like a naked street bike or even a naked race bike. It is that good, this engine, really powerful. There's questions about the reliability that come up every time this bike is reviewed and featured, and you know, I cannot comment any further than say this one's worked, and it's a concern when you see all those reports. So hopefully they're isolated, they get ironed out, and the warranty side of things of KTM, you know, backs up any problems people do encounter. Because the best adventure bike is the bike that gets you there. The engine then has tons of power. It has tons of power, and it delivers it in fistfuls. However, it's extremely easy to access the lower levels of power. So when you're in town, getting through traffic, negotiating various off-road obstacles and stuff, this is a really beautifully smooth power delivery at the lower revs. It's great, it manages to do both things. And that really needs to be commended, because most performance machines that I've ever ridden of any sector, denomination of motorcycling, they're usually pretty uncompromising, and they only come alive and make sense in their little power band. And outside of it, they're pretty much a handful, and they're not particularly nice places to be. But this one is a really lovely place to be at docile speeds. It's asking you to be naughty all the time, there's no doubt about it. This bike wants to be ridden. But when you say no, not today, not right now, it totally listens, and it is a joy. It really is an effortless joy to ride this bike through traffic, and when the situation just requires a little bit more reserve, which again is not something I necessarily was expecting. So the engine, buckets of power, dependability, you know, we need to rely on the words of others on that. It makes a funny noise. It's not the best sounding, most beautiful engine, and that's something of a downside, because when you buy a bike like this, you want the theatre, the performance that you'd expect from, you know, essentially like a race-tuned bike, but you don't really get the sensation of it. The exhaust is brilliant in the sense of if you want to be completely stealthy and quiet, it achieves that. Like, it makes no noise, but the engine noise itself is fairly jarring. So when you turn it on, it jangles quite a bit. It's just a bit abrasive. It's not enough to be characterful like an old Desmo engine on a Ducati sort of bag of nails kind of thing, but it's also just very noticeable. It does warm up and it goes away a bit, and then as you start riding, other noises and factors kind of come into play, and it seems to sort of disappear from you know, notability. But it's definitely not the nicest sounding engine, which is, you know, just a minor detraction from just how good that powertrain is, I suppose. Moving on to the suspension, it's mind-blowingly good, and I'm not bullshitting you. I'm not an expert in suspension, but you know something good when you experience it. And I think with suspension, there is a lot of down the pub when we're talking about bikes, the men like to separate themselves from the boys by saying they know how many clicks to do this way and that way depending on the conditions, and we just sort of nod along and pretend we know what we're talking about. But you notice really good suspension, and this is stunning. It's absolutely stunning. So whether it's worth it for this extra £3 grand, I can't compare it to the stock one because obviously I've only ridden this. But yeah, you would not be disappointed. It has the ability to, a bit like the engine, do both things all at once. So it can, at slow speeds, it can be gentle and it can be compliant and it can take some pretty big hits without jarring you at all. And yet when you throw yourself through rocks and ruts, or you're absolutely jamming on the brakes through traffic, this thing is planted and poised at all times, and I don't know how it does it. It's got 205 kilos plus me, whatever else I'm carrying, and however much I've put in the tank. You'd expect a significant amount of body roll when you accelerate with a weight transfer, or decelerate hard into a corner, or just put simply, when you're tackling the kinds of terrain I'm on today. I'm halfway up, it probably doesn't look it on camera, but a very steep slope I'd never been on. It was very sketchy in lots of places, and found this beautiful spot, thankfully. But the suspension's just wonderful, doing its thing in all scenarios. It always feels composed, whether you are giving it big shocks or you're giving it lots of little shocks, and you're on-road or off-road. I don't have to change settings between the two, it just works well on both. The brakes are just like the suspension. They will give you so much stopping power when you want to grab a fistful, when you're throwing it through corners, when you're braking in traffic and trying to get around buses and whatever else you want to be doing. And they just feel like a naked race bike. They feel really powerful. And again, given the weight we've got going on, you just forget about it completely. Yet when you're off-road and you want just light, progressive, easy to modulate brakes, especially with the rear, it's perfect, it's brilliant. Nothing changes, but yet it still works well in both. So it's a really great package in terms of drivetrain, suspension, brakes. All comes together. The riding position is just perfect. Everything falls neatly into place. I'm never getting neutral with my massive feet by mistake as I'm going along, and it all just feels really good. And that sort of leads me on to another point about the stance of the bike as a whole. Because of these really low slung tanks, and this was, I guess, the biggest talking point when this bike came out, because everyone was like, whoa, what's going on? You know, you've got the weight held so low, it looks kind of weird. And I was one of those that sort of thought, oh, I don't like it. I don't like it aesthetically that much. But when you actually appreciate the net benefit of it in practice, forget about it. I don't care if it doesn't look quite as sexy as perhaps some other bikes do, because they do a really great job. When you are on this bike, you're on it. You're not, as with most middleweight and heavyweight adventure bikes, you're not in the seat and behind the bike as a passenger. You're on it, you're above it, and you're dictating what's happening with the bike. You feel like it's just a big, powerful enduro machine, like it was a big brother to the 500 EXCF or something like that, because you just forget about all this monumental heft and weight when you're going along, and that's largely helped by the tanks. The tanks will also have a really good side benefit, which wasn't something I was expecting. Single cylinder bikes tend to just carve through water crossings and sustained deep puddles like a knife, and you tend not to get too wet. Bigger bikes, pretty much without exception, they tend to just funnel the jet of water up the inside of your leg. And that's really annoying because, you know, even with gaiters, even with really good waterproof boots, you can still have water finding its way in. And if you're doing an off-road rally in the winter, stuff like that's just annoying. This thing protects you completely. These big bulbous balls that you've got going along just pushes the water out the way like Moses parting the Red Sea. And that was really lovely. On the weekend I took this out, and it's surprisingly wet for the time of year because we have had quite a lot of rain recently, and I didn't get even close to getting wet feet, and that was just really nice not to have wet feet for once on a bigger bike. So that's an unintended consequence. It also serves as kind of crash protection. When the bike falls over, it helps you with the ability to get it up, to right it, and you know, you've got the big bash plate and stuff as well. So pretty well considered. It practically makes a lot of sense. But then on to bigger considerations about the bike, like, does the lower slung weight of the tank, does that do enough to offset the feel, the weight of the bike? to make it effortless and easy to ride in challenging conditions. No, like it just doesn't. It doesn't go anywhere near far enough to prevent the sort of the stress or the anxiety that you get on really narrow, difficult, uncharted trails where you're thinking, oh, crap, what happens if I turn this corner and there's, you know, best part of a vertical, chalky, wet wall and I just don't quite have the right tyres and I'm on a path that's like half a metre wide on this thing that's incredibly steep. What am I going to do? How am I going to turn it around? Can I even do that? Can I get back down? Or, you know, you worry about these things as you're doing it. Whereas if you're on a single cylinder bike, you just don't. You're fine. I'll just have to pick it up and turn it around. Like, it's far less stressful. It takes that anxiety out of it. You've got range anxiety usually with the tank issue, which you don't hear because you've got a huge capacity with these tanks. But it doesn't magically do away with all the problems that you get from a big 200 plus kilo bike. It would be impossible, implausible for it to do that. And in that sense, it leads to sort of the wider point of like a performance adventure bike is something of a kind of paradox, because the adventure category it didn't come about because people wanted to go as fast as they could. That wasn't the idea. We wanted to explore new places, be able to access anywhere really in any kind of terrain and have fun doing it and to connect to our surroundings. When you add so much performance focus to it, you sort of detract from that slightly and you lose a bit the point. I've never gone down a trail like this and thought, oh, that would be more fun if I could just do it that little bit quicker, because you ride to sight lines. You know, you might have someone else like you coming the other way, or a dog walker, or someone on a horse that you can't see around the corner, and it would be irresponsible to do anything like that. There are practical applications where you could enter a rally. I'm doing the Baja Wales in a few weeks' time on my T7. This would be the best entrant for that. This would be absolutely fantastic and really capable, probably in its class, the best thing you could choose. But would I be faster and more confident or have more fun on this than a single cylinder? Well, no. And would I be that much quicker on it than on my T7, which is less powered, it's not as poised, it's not quite as good in these senses, but marginally, but irrelevantly, largely. Like someone, if I rode this and someone better than me rode my T7, they're still going to run circles around me. It's not the defining factor. The gains to the rider of, you know, really any ability from having this kind of performance in a package like this are minimal. It's more about knowing that you've got it, and that's half the fun. But weirdly for me, therefore, where it actually does make sense and where it is notably qualitatively better than what I get from my T7 is not actually off-road, because I don't mind. I could ride either. This doesn't make me beam from ear to ear any more than my T7 does off-road. I love both, and they're both equally good and they're both equally limited, really, in the grand scheme of things. It's on-road. This thing is such a fun bike for getting through town on, because like I said, if you're not in the mood, fine, it'll do it. It's easy, it's dependable, and if you are in the mood, it really, really is super quick. You can just dart through the poise, the lack of body roll, the composition of the suspension, everything about the feel of this bike is just so good. And in that sense, it turns commutes, just boring rides, into adventures, into something fun. And adventure bikes often struggle to access that level of fun on the roads. So for me then, weirdly, this is the perfect bike if I had to have one adventure bike that I wanted to be able to use every day to get to work, to have as much fun as I could, but also have a bike that can do the pointy stuff when I want it to as well as possible. So there we have it, a bike that spec-wise is best in class, but where it excels most is maybe outside of that particular classroom. So on that bombshell, let me know if you have any questions about anything I've not really addressed here in this review, and equally if you have got the bike, anything you can add to the dialogue is always useful. And stay tuned, we have tons of content coming up, and I will be literally in the studio every day for the next few weeks, getting some of the autumn winter collections, of which there's some unbelievable gear to show you and get excited about, much of which I've been testing as I've been riding this wonderful machine. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you again on Adventure Rider soon. Stay tuned, goodbye.